Let's be honest, when you hear the term cybersecurity vulnerability, what pops into your head? Probably some shadowy hacker in a hoodie pulling off some unstoppable high-tech attack, right? It's a pretty intimidating world. But what if I told you that most of what we're scared of is really based on myths? Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and replace the fear with the real, practical understanding of what you actually need to worry about. I love this quote from Prof because it just perfectly nails one of the biggest headaches in cybersecurity. You've got these older systems, legacy systems, and trying to secure them, well, it really is like trying to shove steel reinforcement bars into jello. You're trying to make something strong, but the foundation itself is fundamentally wobbly. And that messy reality is the perfect place for us to start. So, what even is a vulnerability, really? To get a good mental picture, let's talk about the Lord of the Rings for a second. Remember the fortress of Helm's Deep? It was supposed to be completely impenetrable. But deep in its massive outer wall, there was one tiny weakness, a little drain. And you know what? That one little weak spot was all the enemy needed to bring the whole thing down. And that drain in the wall, that is a perfect real-world example of what this official NIST definition is talking about. When you strip away all the jargon, a vulnerability is just that, a weak spot. It could be a flaw in the software, a sloppy procedure, or a bad setting. Basically, anything a threat could use to get inside. Okay, so this brings us to the biggest, most sensationalized myth in all of cybersecurity, the zero-day attack. You know, this is the stuff you see in movies. The elite hacker finds a secret flaw that nobody knows about, and boom, they're in. But is that what's really happening out there? Are they actually that common? I mean, the name itself sounds terrifying, doesn't it? Zero day. And that's because it's a vulnerability that the people who made the software, they don't know about it yet. So if a bad guy finds it first, we have, you guessed it, literally 0 days to get a defense ready before they can use it against us. But okay, let's cut through the hype and look at the actual numbers. This is a chart from Google's Project Zero, and it shows how many 0 days were actually caught being used in the wild, as in real attacks. You can see the numbers are mostly in the dozens. There was a big spike in 2021 all the way up to 58. Now, keep that number in your head, 58. Now, for some perspective, in that exact same year, 2021, want to guess how many total publicly known vulnerabilities or CVEs were registered? Almost 14,500. And out of all of those, how many were 0 days discovered in the wild? Yep, just 58. The difference is it's staggering. So when you do the math, 58 out of more than 14,000, that means 0 days made up less than half of 1% of all the known vulnerabilities that year. So why the massive difference? Well, you can think of 0 days like diamonds. They're incredibly rare, they're super expensive to find and use, and it's risky for an attacker to deploy one. It's so much easier and cheaper for them to just use one of the thousands of old known vulnerabilities that an organization just never got around to fixing. Okay, so if there are literally thousands of these known vulnerabilities, how on earth do we even begin to keep track of them? Well, we've built systems for that, to catalog them and score them. But here's the really important thing to remember. These systems are run by people, and that means they are, by their very nature, imperfect and subjective. So first up, we've got the CVE list. You can think of it as kind of like a most wanted list for software flaws. But, and this is a big but, it's not a complete list of every single bug out there. A flaw only gets a CVE number if someone reports it and the people in charge decide it's interesting enough to add to the list. A lot of flaws get fixed quietly and never get a CVE at all. And then we try to score them using something called CVSS. The whole idea is to boil down how bad a flaw is into a single number, from 0 to 10. The problem is, severity isn't some universal constant. It totally depends on your situation. A supercritical flaw in a database doesn't matter one bit to a company that doesn't even use that database. See? Context is everything. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at this. This is a perfect example of that subjectivity in action. Here's a specific vulnerability. 2 different very smart organizations, NIST and CERT. They looked at the exact same flaw. NIST came back and said, that's a 7.8. That's high severity. But CERT looked at it and said, we think it's a 6.6. Medium. Same bug, different expert opinions. So up to this point, we've been talking all about flaws in software code, right? But what if I told you that some of the most effective, most common attacks have absolutely nothing to do with exploiting a single line of code? Instead, they go after something that's way more vulnerable: us, people. See, attackers are smart, and frankly, they can be lazy. Why bother trying to bash down a heavily fortified digital wall when you can just trick someone into opening the front gate for you? They use stolen passwords, they guess easy default passwords like admin, they send tricky phishing emails, or, they just walk into a building. These attacks target people and processes, not software. And I mean, it can get really, really low tech. Attackers will literally go dumpster diving. They will dig through a company's trash, looking for things like handwritten notes, discarded documents, old hard drives, anything that might have useful information. It sounds wild, but it's cheap, it's easy, and you would be absolutely floored by what they find. But this is where it gets kind of scary, and also a little sci-fi. In one crazy true story, a scammer used AI software to create a deepfake, a perfect clone of a CEO's voice. They then used that voice on a phone call to convince an employee that they were their boss, and tricked them into wiring almost $250,000 to a fraudulent account. No code was hacked, just human trust. All right, so let's pull all this together. We've busted some pretty big myths. We know that 0 days are super rare, we know the scoring systems are subjective, and we know that the human factor is a huge, huge risk. So that leads to the final and most important question. What actually matters? How should we really be thinking about all this? To really drive this home, I want you to think about this with one last analogy. Is it technically possible for a massive blizzard to hit Miami Beach? I mean, sure, in some bizarre physics-defying scenario, maybe. But is it likely? Not a chance. Obsessing over 0-day attacks is exactly like that. It's preparing for a blizzard in Miami. Because if you live in Miami, you don't waste your time and money preparing for blizzards. You prepare for hurricanes. You board up the windows, you stock up on water, because you know hurricanes are the real, the recurring, the likely threat. In cybersecurity, our hurricanes are those thousands of known, unpatched vulnerabilities and all those simple, human-focused attacks that we just talked about. And that's really the question I want to leave you with. Are you or is your organization spending all of its energy preparing for that 1 in a billion blizzard that might never arrive? Or are you focused on the hurricane that you can already see forming on the horizon? Because focusing on those known, everyday threats, that is the most rational and the most effective way to actually stay safe.